The shuttle descended through the jeweled skies of Zytheris, its hull reflecting the fractured light of the planet's crystalline spires. Elias Varan sat rigid in his seat, hands clasped tightly in his lap, the weight of his mission pressing on him like an iron mantle. Outside, the landscape shimmered as if the entire world had been carved from prisms, refracting every sliver of starlight into colors that hurt the human eye if stared at too long. The Zyrathi called it the eternal gleam, a sign of their planet's divine favor. To Elias, it looked like a place where one misstep could cut a man to pieces. He exhaled slowly, rehearsing the opening lines of his address. Stability, respect, mutual gain. No slips, no arrogance. Humanity's fragile expansion into this quadrant depended on him not offending their crystalline hosts. And yet, despite the training, his stomach nodded. The Zyrathi were not a people one could predict. Their customs stretched back millennia, layered with meaning humans had barely begun to decipher. The shuttle jolted as it touched down on a platform suspended between two colossal crystal pillars. Waiting for him was a procession unlike anything he had seen before. The Zyrathi guards were tall and elegant, their bodies covered in iridescent plates that shifted in hue with each movement. Wing-like membranes folded neatly against their backs, and their eyes glowed faintly like twin sapphires in their elongated faces. They stood in perfect symmetry, holding ceremonial staves that pulsed with inner light. Elias adjusted his ambassadorial sash, forcing his face into a mask of calm dignity, though his pulse hammered. As he descended the ramp, the air struck him first, a sharp mineral tang, cool and humming with faint vibrations that seemed to resonate in his bones. At the far end of the crystalline corridor stood Queen Saralith. She was unlike her guards, more resplendent, her carapace layered with translucent plates that caught and amplified the light, making her seem as though she wore living starlight as a gown. Her wings curved like glass sculptures, and a crown of luminous crystal spires rose from her brow. But what caught Elias most was her gaze, curious, amused, as though she already knew a joke he hadn't yet heard. Elias moved forward, every step measured. The human delegation followed a pace behind, but all eyes, both alien and human, were fixed on him. This was the moment that would set the tone for everything. His instructors had drilled him. Do not bow, do not kneel, avoid gestures that could be misread. He cleared his throat, recalling the words, and then, without thinking, perhaps out of instinct, perhaps from some subconscious desire to show sincerity, he pressed his right hand flat against his chest, over his heart before speaking. "Your Radiance," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. "I come in the name of peace, bearing humanity's respect and hopes for a bond that may outlast us all." The chamber went utterly still. The Zyrathi guards tilted their heads, their eyes brightening. A low murmur echoed through the crystalline hall like a ripple of bells. Elias' hand lingered at his chest only a second before he realized the silence had a weight to it, a recognition. He dropped his arm quickly, trying not to let his confusion show. Queen Saralith stepped forward, each movement a deliberate grace. The amused curve of her mouth deepened, and her wings shimmered with a ripple of faint violet light. She drew close enough that Elias could feel the faint hum of energy radiating from her form. For a moment she studied him, her gaze sharp as though dissecting his very soul. Then, leaning in, her voice a whisper that carried through the hall with crystalline clarity, she said, "I accept." Elias blinked. The human envoys behind him shifted uneasily, whispers rising in their ranks. But the Zyrathi court erupted, not in outrage but in melodic tones of approval, their voices blending into what sounded disturbingly like celebration. Saralith extended her hand, slender and gleaming like carved crystal, as though expecting him to take it. Panic coiled in his gut. He had followed protocol, hadn't he? He had bowed to no one, knelt before no throne. He had only, his mind replayed the motion in horror, placed his hand over his heart. What did that mean here? The queen's eyes glittered with satisfaction. She tilted her head, speaking again, softer, almost teasing. "A rare boldness, human. Few would dare offer so direct a pledge before the eternal gleam. Yet you have." The word struck him like a blow, a pledge. No, he hadn't pledged anything. His lips parted to protest, to clarify, but the weight of hundreds of eyes pressed down on him. Already the chamber was alive with excitement, the guards lowering their staves in a gesture of honor. The delegation at his back muttered, a rising note of alarm threading through their diplomatic restraint. Sarilith's hand remained extended, her expectant smile never faltering. The silence stretched. Elias felt the raw pull of inevitability. An entire galaxy might hang on the choice of whether or not to touch her hand. He swallowed, sweat beating at his temple, and slowly reached out. Their hands met. A surge of energy pulsed through the crystalline hall, echoing like a chorus of bells. The Queen's wings flared briefly, and the court's voices rose to meet it. The first words of the treaty had not yet been spoken, yet somehow, Elias knew, something far greater had just been set in motion. The guards' stares never wavered as the human delegation shuffled forward, the metallic clatter of their boots echoing against the crystalline floor. Elias' pulse had yet to settle. The words, "I accept," lingered in the air like a song whose melody he could not place. He forced himself to maintain composure, though every nerve felt raw, alert, and painfully aware of the weight of the moment. Queen Sarilith had released her hand, letting it hover in midair, but the sense of expectation remained palpable, like the silence before a storm breaks. A Zyrathi advisor, sleek and angular with shimmering wings folded neatly along his spine, stepped forward, his voice a melodic cascade of tones that humans had learned to interpret as a single, deliberate sentence. "Your pledge has been recognized, your radiance." The human ambassador's gesture constitutes the ancient declaration of intent. Shall the ceremonial record be prepared? Elia's stomach sank. Record, ancient declaration. I didn't declare anything. I just moved my hand like a fool. He opened his mouth to clarify, but Queen Sarilith lifted a single crystalline finger, a gentle pause that silenced both him and the murmuring delegation. "The human is correct in intent but unaware in tradition," she said, her voice smooth and teasing, vibrating slightly as it passed through the air. "Yet the gesture has been made, and the gesture is binding by our laws." A ripple of excitement ran through the chamber. Some of the Zyrathi courtiers tilted their heads, wings fluttering lightly, while others began to whisper in a language that sounded like a symphony of wind chimes. The humans shifted, some uncomfortable, some staring in disbelief. Elias clenched his fists at his sides, trying to remember his training. Control, adapt, survive. Sarilith's eyes held his for a moment longer. "Ambassador Elias Varon," she continued, each syllable deliberate, "you have entered our court with respect and sincerity. These are virtues we value. Yet the ritual you performed is not without consequence. You have, in our eyes, initiated a bond of intent that the Zyrathi do not take lightly." The words hit him like a hammer. A bond of intent. He could feel the panic bubbling beneath the surface, but he forced himself to breathe. "Your radiance, he began, but found the words faltering. How do you explain a mistake of ignorance to a queen who sees every move as deliberate? Sarilith leaned back slightly, her wings unfurling just enough to glint with violet light. "No harm has been done," she said, her tone playful now, as if she enjoyed the awkward tension that clung to him. "Indeed, it is quite refreshing to see a human so earnest, but the elders will demand recognition. And so, unless a counter-ritual is performed, which you would struggle to execute without deep knowledge of Zyrathi custom, you are, by our laws, bound to this pledge." The chamber hummed with a low resonance as if the building itself acknowledged her words. Elias' advisors whispered urgently behind him, fingers brushing their comms, their faces pale. "We need to intervene," one muttered. "This could escalate into a diplomatic crisis. It's a misunderstanding." Elias lifted a hand to silence them, trying to ignore the quake in his voice. "I understand," he said carefully, "but I will follow protocol. Please allow me a moment to speak privately with the Queen." Sarilith's smile widened slightly, her eyes sparkling. "Very well, human. But know this, Zyrathi tradition moves slowly and deliberately. It watches, it waits, and it does not forgive rashness. They moved to a side chamber, a smaller hall filled with crystalline arches that refracted light into intricate patterns across the floor. Here, the hum of the larger court faded into a soft vibration that seemed almost like a heartbeat. Elias exhaled sharply, feeling the tension in his shoulders, the weight of responsibility pressing down. "Your Radiance," he began, bowing as respectfully as he dared. "I did not intend this. My gesture was meant only to convey sincerity, nothing more. I did not know it would be interpreted." Sarilith raised a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "I am aware of your intent, human. That is why I find this so amusing. Many before you would have trembled at such a misunderstanding, but your earnestness is unusual, and I confess I am curious." Elias blinked. Curiosity. Not anger, not dismissal. "Curious," he repeated cautiously. "Yes," she said, stepping closer. The faint scent of mineral and ozone clung to her, subtle yet intoxicating in its strangeness. "I am curious to see how a human navigates the intricacies of Zyrathi tradition. How you respond to an accidental pledge may tell me more than years of formal diplomacy ever could." He swallowed hard, feeling the tension in his chest twist into a mixture of fear and fascination. Curiosity. That could be a dangerous thing in a court like this. "Then I will do everything I can to honor your traditions," he said, "to understand and respect them, and—" "You will learn quickly," she interrupted, a glint of amusement in her gaze. "And you will make mistakes along the way. That is expected. What is not expected is courage, honesty, and the willingness to step forward when the stakes are highest. Let us see if you possess these qualities, Elias Varen." The human blinked at the sound of his own name on her tongue, a reminder that the bond, intentional or not, was now inescapable. He felt the weight of the court outside pressing in again, the potential for catastrophe hovering just beyond the walls of the chamber. "I will not fail," he said finally, with a steadiness that surprised even him. "For the sake of peace and for the sake of understanding your people." Sarilith studied him for a long moment, her wings flicking lightly, and then she inclined her head. "We shall see, human. We shall see." The chamber's light shifted as she moved aside, a subtle signal that their private audience had ended. Elias exhaled slowly, realizing that the first step into this tangled web of ritual, diplomacy, and unintended intimacy had been taken. Outside, the court waited, the crystal pillars gleaming as if aware that history, strange, unpredictable, and dangerous, was quietly being written. The ambassador straightened his shoulders and followed her back into the larger hall, every step a reminder that one accidental gesture had changed everything. He had not proposed, yet the Queen had accepted. And in that acceptance, the fragile balance of interstellar diplomacy had taken a sharp, unpredictable turn. The crystal hall buzzed with anticipation as Elias followed Queen Sarilith back into the main chamber. The Zyrathi nobles had reorganized themselves, their wings folding and unfolding in subtle, hypnotic rhythms, their multifaceted eyes glinting with curiosity and judgment. Every movement of the Queen sent ripples of light dancing across the polished floor, illuminating the tension that hung in the air like a tangible force. Elias felt as though he were walking a tightrope stretched across a chasm of centuries-old tradition, with a single misstep capable of igniting chaos. Sarilith paused in the center of the chamber, turning her gaze toward the gathered council. "The pledge has been made," she announced, her voice clear and melodious, carrying a weight that silent. He could feel the gravity of the court's expectations pressing down on him like a crystal ceiling he could not see. "I understand," he said, the words steady despite the whirlwind of fear and anticipation inside him. Sarilith stepped closer once more, the faint hum of energy around her wings brushing against him. "Come," she said, gesturing toward the chambers beyond the hall. "Your first lessons will begin immediately. Observation is the precursor to understanding. You will see the Zyrathi not as creatures of legend, but as a people with desires, fears, and traditions as complex as your own. Pay attention, human, and you may yet survive the curiosity you have invoked." Elias followed her, each step heavy with awareness, as the hall behind them shimmered with the light of 100 crystalline surfaces. The whispers of the council faded into the background, replaced by the steady hum of energy that thrummed through the corridors. He had not intended to pledge anything, yet here he was, caught in a ritual of his own making. As they moved deeper into the palace, Elias realized that his role had changed forever. No longer simply a messenger of peace, he was now entwined in a living web of tradition, power, and expectation. And somewhere within the enigmatic gaze of Queen Saralith, he sensed a spark of challenge, a test he had yet to comprehend. The corridors opened into a vast atrium filled with floating pools of luminescent liquid, suspended midair by subtle magnetic currents. The reflections painted distorted patterns across the walls, fractals of color that seemed almost alive. Saralith paused at the center, turning to face him fully. "Here begins your education, ambassador," she said softly, her wings fluttering to accentuate the rhythm of her words. "Every action matters, every word resonates, and every choice may lead us toward peace or peril. Choose wisely." Elias swallowed, feeling the first true weight of his unintended commitment. The accidental gesture had set him on a path he could not reverse, and the lessons of Sci-Fi would begin now, whether he was ready or not. The council chamber had emptied, leaving the crystalline walls echoing faintly with the remnants of conversation. Elias lingered near the atrium's edge, still absorbing the weight of Saralith's words. The luminescent pools hovered serenely in the air, their light reflecting in fractured patterns across his uniform. Every reflection reminded him that his presence here was no longer casual. He was now bound to the Zyrathi by ritual and by law, whether he understood it or not. A voice, calm and deliberate, broke his thoughts. "Human." Elias turned to see one of the senior advisors approaching, his translucent plates catching the refracted light. "The elders will convene shortly. They will determine the consequences of your gesture. You may not find their decisions convenient or favorable, but they will be binding." Elias swallowed, nodding. "I understand." The words felt hollow in his throat, yet he forced them out. He could feel the tension rising again, the tight coil of obligation and expectation pressing against his chest. "I will cooperate fully." The advisor inclined his head. "Good. Remember, the Zyrathi observe not only actions but intent. Do not attempt deception. It is easily perceived and consequences are swift." With that, he glided away, leaving Elias alone once more. Moments later, Saralith returned, her wings folded gracefully against her back. She studied him with eyes that shimmered faintly violet. "You are aware, human, that your accidental gesture has put us both in a precarious position," she said, her voice carrying the subtle cadence of amusement beneath seriousness. "The elders will not see it merely as a curiosity. They will view it as a binding act of diplomacy with the weight of generations behind it." Elias' stomach churned. "I did not intend to." "You intended sincerity," she interrupted smoothly, "and that is what matters in the long run. But intent alone does not absolve you of consequence. The elders will insist on recognition of the pledge. You may choose to resist, but that path leads only to conflict." He exhaled slowly, realizing the depth of her words. Conflict. He had not expected that a single gesture could escalate into a potential diplomatic crisis. Every strategy he had prepared for negotiation seemed suddenly inadequate. "Then I have no choice," he said finally, "but to honor the pledge as it is understood by your people." Saralith's wings fluttered faintly, a sign of approval or perhaps anticipation. "Wise," she murmured. "Acceptance is rarely simple, human. It is not merely a matter of words, but of understanding the depth of our customs and the eyes of the court upon you." Elias' gaze drifted to the hovering pools, their luminescent surfaces reflecting shards of light onto the walls. Each shard seemed to mimic the uncertainty he felt within. "I will learn," he said, a quiet determination threading his voice. "I will learn your ways and I will act in accordance with your customs." She studied him closely, then inclined her head in a subtle, approving gesture. "Then let us begin." She led him down a corridor lined with translucent columns, each filled with shifting colors that seemed to respond to their movement. The hallways resonated faintly, a gentle hum that felt almost alive, guiding them toward the council chambers. The council chamber itself was immense, far larger than the atrium, with high ceilings that refracted light into dazzling patterns across the floor. At the far end, a semicircle of Elder Zyrathia waited, their wings folded in strict symmetry, eyes fixed intently on the pair. Each elder bore the weight of centuries in their expression, and Elias felt the pressure of their scrutiny before he had even spoken a word. Sarilith gestured subtly, indicating he should step forward. He did so, each movement measured, aware that the slightest hesitation might be interpreted as insolence or deceit. "Esteemed elders," he began, his voice steady despite the storm of nerves within him, "I come as humanity's ambassador, and I wish to convey my sincere respect for your customs and for your queen." One elder tilted his head, his voice resonating like polished crystal. "Your gesture has been observed, human. Its interpretation is binding. Explain your intent, and perhaps the court will consider your perspective." Elias swallowed, choosing his words with care. "I acted only to convey respect and sincerity. I was unaware that the gesture constituted a formal pledge. I did not intend to create obligations beyond diplomacy." A murmur ran through the council, a complex layering of tones that was nearly musical. Sarilith remained silent, watching, her expression unreadable. Finally, the senior elder spoke again. "Intent is acknowledged, but custom is clear. Withdrawal from the pledge is not permissible without a counter-ritual, one which is neither simple nor common. The bond remains and must be honored." Elias' heart sank. "Then, I am bound." "Yes," another elder intoned, wings flicking gently in unison. "The pledge has been made. To honor it is to honor both your word and the integrity of this court." He nodded slowly, the enormity of the situation pressing on him. There was no room for argument, no loopholes, no escape. A single accidental gesture had transformed his mission, entwining him not only with diplomacy but with a living, breathing tradition centuries old. Sarilith stepped forward, placing a gentle hand near his arm. "Do not despair, human. The court will observe, yes, but they also value honesty, courage, and adaptation. These qualities may turn what appears to be misfortune into opportunity. You will learn more in the days ahead than many do in lifetimes." Elias drew a slow breath, trying to steady his thoughts. Opportunity, yes, but at what cost? Yet beneath the anxiety, a spark of resolve ignited. If he could navigate this, if he could honor the pledge while maintaining peace, perhaps he could achieve something greater than diplomacy alone, a bridge between two worlds. The council murmured once more, then Sarilith inclined her head, signaling that the session had concluded. "Return with me," she said, her voice gentle, yet carrying unmistakable authority. "Your lessons begin immediately. Observation, engagement, and adaptation will be your tools. Fail in these, and the consequences may ripple farther than you imagine." Elias followed her, every step a reminder that the accidental gesture had set a chain of events into motion that could not be undone. Outside the council chamber, the light of the crystalline spires shimmered in waves, a silent witness to the birth of a bond neither had expected, and the quiet beginning of a journey that would test him in ways he had never imagined. The corridor leading from the council chamber was alive with faint vibrations, the crystalline walls humming softly as if echoing the weight of the verdict. Elias walked beside Sarilith, each step deliberate, his mind racing to process the reality that had settled like a stone in his chest. He was bound by ritual, by tradition, and by the Queen's own acknowledgement. There was no retreat, no simple explanation to smooth over the mistake. Every instinct screamed caution, yet he could not allow fear to paralyze him. Sarilith's wings shifted, creating a ripple of violet light across the walls. "You are aware, human, that your life here will be intertwined with mine," she said casually, her voice melodic and precise. "The elders have made their judgment. You are to remain at the palace under my guidance until the terms of the pledge are fulfilled. This is not a punishment, it is necessity. Elias nodded, forcing his gaze to meet hers. I understand, he said, and I will do what is required. Her eyes softened faintly, though the glimmer of amusement never left them. Good. You have accepted your circumstances with more grace than I expected. That will serve you well. They entered a grand chamber beyond the corridor, its architecture a fluid mesh of crystalline spires and floating platforms. Pools of suspended liquid glowed with an inner light, reflecting fractal patterns across the walls. The room felt alive, as if it recognized the presence of both human and Xyrathi. Sarilith gestured toward one of the floating platforms. This will be your quarters, she said. Comfortable enough for a visitor of your standing, though not meant for indulgence. You will find it adequate for the duration of your observation. Elias stepped onto the platform, its surface responding to his weight with a faint hum. Adequate, he repeated, trying to summon a sense of calm. The notion of comfort felt distant, overshadowed by the constant awareness of the pledge and the expectations it carried. The queen followed, her movements fluid, graceful, yet deliberate. You must understand, human, she continued, her voice carrying a mixture of instruction and warning. That proximity to the queen is not a privilege lightly granted. It is both opportunity and scrutiny. You will learn our customs, witness our rituals, and participate where necessary. Every action will be observed, every word considered. He nodded, aware that any misstep could be magnified under the eyes of the Xyrathi court. I will do my best, he said, the words firm despite the knot of anxiety in his stomach. Sarilith's wings fluttered lightly, and she studied him with an intensity that made him shift slightly. Good. Your best is all that can be demanded. Yet know this, our customs are intricate, layered, and sometimes perilous to the uninitiated. Do not assume that your experience with human diplomacy will translate here. Observation is your first lesson. The floating platform shifted, guiding them along a path through the chamber. Pools of suspended liquid reflected distorted images of them, a reminder of the duality he now occupied, human and participant in Xyrathi tradition. Elias' gaze lingered on the reflections, aware of the symbolic weight they carried. Sarilith stopped at a crystalline doorway that led into a smaller hall, the air inside tingling faintly with energy. Here, human, you will begin your first lesson, she said. Observation of our ceremonies is not passive. You must notice details, anticipate reactions, and understand context. Only then will you truly grasp the meaning of your pledge. Elias took a deep breath. I understand, he said again, the repetition helping him anchor his resolve. The queen inclined her head slightly, signaling him to enter. Inside, a gathering of Xyrathi performers arranged themselves around a central spire, their wings folding and unfolding in a synchronized pattern. The ceremony began with a low harmonic resonance, each note vibrating through the floor, up into the pledge binds you to proximity, yes, but also to participation. Elias swallowed, stepping onto the platform that would carry him through the hallways once more. He followed her silently, absorbing the ambient energy that seemed to cling to every surface. The palace felt alive, each crystal resonance a reminder that he was now not only a visitor but a participant in a living web of tradition and expectation. They entered a large chamber, more ceremonial than the others, with a central dais rising from the floor like a jagged sculpture of living light. Sarilith moved toward it gracefully, and Elias noted how her presence commanded attention without effort. Today, she said, you will witness the ceremony of unity. It is an ancient ritual performed to honor alliances and commitments. You will observe closely, noting gestures, timing, and reactions. Everything is meaningful. Elias nodded, heart pounding. This was not merely observation, it was immersion. Every motion, every shift of expression carried layers of meaning he could not yet fully comprehend. He took a deep breath, focusing on the task at hand. The ceremony began with the soft resonance of crystal instruments, producing harmonics that vibrated through the air, through the floor, and into the core of Elias' being. Xyrathi dancers moved in intricate formations, their wings creating ripples of color that refracted across the chamber. Each movement was precise, deliberate, a language of motion and light. Seralith's voice broke the hum, low and instructive. Notice the subtleties, the tilt of the wing, the pause before the step, the change in tone of the chant. Each is a message, a signal, a test of understanding. Elias watched intently, cataloging the gestures in his mind. He noted how the dancers shifted their weight slightly to indicate hierarchy, how the elders' eyes followed specific movements, and how even the direction of gaze carried intention. The complexity of the ritual overwhelmed him at first, but he forced himself to remain calm, to absorb every detail. Hours passed as he immersed himself in observation. He felt his initial panic give way to a tentative fascination. The Xyrathi customs, so alien and intricate, began to make sense in small increments. Each layer of meaning he deciphered felt like a victory, a small foothold in a world that had once seemed impossible to navigate. When the ceremony concluded, the chamber was silent, the echoes of the final harmonic vibrations lingering in the air. Elias exhaled slowly, feeling the mental strain loosen slightly, though the weight of the pledge remained. Seralith turned to him, wings fluttering lightly. "You have observed well," she said. "Few humans endure more than one cycle of the ceremony without error or distraction. You have begun to understand, though comprehension is far from complete." Elias bowed slightly, exhaustion mingling with relief. "Thank you, Your Radiance. I will continue to learn." She smiled faintly, a subtle curve of lips that suggested both approval and challenge. "Good. Understanding requires engagement. Knowledge alone is insufficient. You must participate when called, respond when observed, and adapt when tested. The pledge is not merely symbolic, it demands presence and action." Elias felt the full weight of her words settle on him. He had thought the pledge was a ceremonial formality, a binding that could be respected through passive compliance. Now he realized that it required active commitment, constant awareness, and the courage to navigate unfamiliar terrain with composure. The Queen gestured toward a secondary chamber where a small gathering awaited. "Your first engagement will be with the Junior Council," she said. "They will present scenarios, request responses, and test your understanding of protocol. Do not underestimate them. Even in minor matters, they can discern truth from deception and intent from error." Elias followed, noting how the palace corridors seemed to pulse with energy, guiding him toward each new challenge. Each step reinforced the gravity of his situation. The pledge had transformed his role entirely. No longer was he merely an ambassador. He was a living participant in Xyrathi tradition, observed, measured, and bound by laws he barely understood. The chamber he entered was intimate compared to the grand halls, yet it radiated authority. The Junior Council awaited, their wings folded, eyes glinting with interest. Seralith inclined her head toward them, then stepped back slightly, allowing Elias to approach. "Ambassador Elias Varon," she said, her voice carrying a mixture of command and expectation, "engage with them. Your actions will reflect both your understanding and your respect for the pledge you have undertaken." Elias inhaled, straightening his posture. Every detail of his demeanor would be scrutinized. Every gesture weighed with significance. And yet beneath the pressure, a spark of resolve ignited. He had survived the first day, endured the ceremonies, and begun to decode the subtle language of the Xyrathi. Now, he would prove that even a human could honor a pledge, not merely by intention, but through deliberate, conscious participation. He stepped forward, meeting the eyes of the Junior Council, feeling the pulse of the palace beneath him, and understood with a sudden clarity that the accidental pledge had not merely bound him to the Queen. It had bound him to a path of growth, understanding, and unexpected connection. The Junior Council's chamber was alive with subtle motion, the Xyrathi members shifting their wings in unison, their eyes scanning every expression Elias displayed. He could feel the intensity of their gaze pressing down on him, each glance dissecting his intent, each tilt of their heads measuring comprehension and honesty. Sarilith remained nearby, her wings folded gracefully, observing his reactions with that same flicker of amusement and challenge he had come to recognize. Ambassador Varen, one of the younger council members, intoned, voice harmonious and precise. The ceremony of unity establishes both understanding and responsibility. How will you demonstrate your respect for the pledge you have undertaken? Elias inhaled, recalling the lessons of the previous day, the rhythms, gestures, and the resonance of intent embedded in Zyrathi tradition. I will observe, participate, and adapt, he said, voice steady. I will follow your customs, learn the subtleties, and act in accordance with both their letter and their spirit. A ripple of wings moved across the room, a subtle signal of acknowledgement. Yet the eyes of the council remained skeptical, trained to detect even the smallest inconsistencies. One elder stepped forward, extending a slender arm, the gesture of formal invitation. Then demonstrate, human. Engage with the protocol of respect and commitment. Show us that your words are more than surface compliance. Elias felt his pulse quicken. The request was direct yet nuanced, an examination of character more than knowledge. He stepped forward, recalling the positioning of stance, the angle of gaze, the cadence of tone. Every micro-gesture mattered. Every movement carried meaning. His training, instincts, and the sharp memory of Sarilith's lessons combined into a careful choreography of respect. He executed the formal acknowledgement, pressing his hand to his chest in a gesture he had learned symbolized sincere intent in Zyrathi culture, then bowed slightly, maintaining eye contact with the eldest member of the council. The room remained silent for a heartbeat, the weight of attention pressing on him like gravity. Then, a ripple of approval swept through the members. A faint, musical resonance filled the chamber, a signal that his demonstration had been recognized as both correct and sincere. Elias exhaled, tension easing slightly, though he remained acutely aware that observation here was ongoing, continuous, and unforgiving. Sarilith stepped closer, her presence both reassuring and commanding. "Well done," she said softly, yet with authority. "Your recognition of ritual and intent is commendable, yet know this: understanding is iterative. Each action, each decision, each response will teach you more than any single demonstration could." Elias nodded, aware that his accomplishment was provisional. Success here was not permanence. It was a step in a journey layered with complexity and potential missteps. He had learned to navigate observation, but true mastery required deeper engagement. The council began to pose scenarios, testing his adaptability. One by one, they presented situations where protocol could conflict with instinct, where quick thinking was required alongside respect for tradition. Each response demanded attention to subtle cues, the tone of voice, the flicker of wings, the slight shift in posture. Elias responded with care, applying lessons from the previous ceremonies, noting reactions and adjusting his approach. At one point, a minor misstep, a hesitation in timing, elicited a quiet murmur of correction from the council. Elias paused, corrected the gesture seamlessly, and continued. The subtle recovery was noted, a demonstration that intent and composure could redeem small errors. He felt the sting of embarrassment, but also a quiet satisfaction at having navigated the challenge. Hours passed in this manner, the council alternating between challenge and observation. By the end, Elias was exhausted yet invigorated, aware of the small victories embedded in every successful response, and the continuous demand for attentiveness inherent in the pledge. Sarilith's voice cut through the ambient hum as the session drew to a close. "You have performed admirably," she said, her wings fluttering lightly in what seemed almost a smile. "Yet this is only the beginning. The pledge binds you not only to observation and ritual, but to presence, responsibility, and adaptation in all circumstances. Tomorrow will demand more, and the days beyond that more still." Elias bowed deeply, acknowledging both her authority and the enormity of the pledge. "I understand, your radiance. I will continue to learn and to act in accordance with your people's customs. Her gaze softened, and for a fleeting moment, the layers of expectation and power seemed to relax. Good, she said. You are learning not only our ways but the subtleties of intent and consequence. Few humans would endure as you have. Yet remember, human proximity is not comfort. It is responsibility, ever present and inescapable. He nodded, feeling the truth in her words. The accidental pledge had led him to this moment, a position both precarious and privileged. Every action he took, every decision he made, would carry implications not only for himself, but for the fragile alliance between humanity and Xyrathi. As they left the chamber, the corridors shimmered in the afternoon light. Elia's mind replayed the lessons of the day, the subtle rhythms, the cadence of observation, the necessity of adaptability. He was no longer merely an ambassador. He was a participant in a living, breathing system of tradition and expectation, bound by law, custom, and the Queen's acknowledgement. Outside, the palace garden stretched in fractal patterns, pools of suspended liquid catching sunlight and scattering it into rainbows across the crystalline paths. Elias paused, taking a deep breath, the weight of responsibility settling over him. He had begun to understand the magnitude of the pledge, and with that understanding came both caution and a tentative resolve. Sarilith watched him from a few steps ahead, her presence a constant reminder of the bond that had begun with a single, unintentional gesture. Rest now, she said softly, her voice carrying both command and suggestion. The lessons are unrelenting, but the mind must be clear to absorb them. Tomorrow, the court will present new challenges. Prepare yourself. Elias nodded silently, moving toward the quarters assigned to him, aware that each step solidified his role not only as ambassador, but as a living embodiment of a pledge that had begun in accident and would demand courage, attentiveness, and presence at every turn. The morning light filtered through the crystalline walls of the palace, scattering prisms of color across the floors and corridors. Elias moved deliberately, aware that each step carried weight far beyond the physical. The pledge bound him not just to Sarilith, but to the customs, expectations, and scrutiny of the Xyrathi court. Every action he took now resonated with significance, a constant test of understanding and intent. Sarilith awaited him at the entrance to the atrium, wings partially extended, their edges shimmering with violet light. Today, she said, her voice a mixture of authority and quiet amusement, you will witness a demonstration of Xyrathi. You have performed admirably, she said softly, wings folding against her back. Yet this is only one facet of the journey. The pledge demands more than skill and observation. It requires courage, adaptability, and the willingness to accept responsibility for actions, both intentional and accidental. Elias rose, feeling the weight of her words settle like a tangible force. I understand your radiance, he said. I will continue to learn and to act in accordance with the pledge I have undertaken. Sarilith's expression softened, a fleeting smile crossing her features. Good. The path is not easy, human, but each step reveals more than knowledge alone could offer. Rest now, for tomorrow brings lessons that will challenge both your mind and your spirit. As Elias followed her to his quarters, he reflected on the day's exercises, the demonstrations, the tests, and the subtle cues that had guided his learning. The pledge had begun with an accident, but it was shaping him in ways he had never anticipated. He was no longer merely an ambassador. He was an active participant in a living culture, bound by tradition, law, and the quiet, enigmatic challenge of Queen Sarilith's presence. The corridors shimmered with light, the palace itself resonating with energy, as if acknowledging his progress and the journey yet to come. Elias stepped forward, aware that every move, every thought, every gesture now carried consequence, and that the accidental pledge had irrevocably intertwined his fate with the Queen and her people. The morning arrived with a soft, diffused light, filtered through the crystalline walls of the palace. Elias rose, muscles still aching from the previous day's intense observation and analysis sessions. The pledge weighed on him more than ever, not as a ceremony or formality, but as a living, pressing responsibility. Every motion, every word, every thought seemed amplified under the scrutiny of the Zirathi court, and most profoundly under Sarilith's ever-watchful gaze. Sarilith met him in the atrium, wings partially extended, their iridescent edges catching the fractured sunlight. "Today," she said, voice carrying authority and subtle amusement, "you will accompany me to the assembly of allies. It is a council of leaders from across Zytheris, and your presence will be observed closely. The pledge you have undertaken is not solely personal, it represents your species. Treat every interaction with care." Elias nodded, swallowing the familiar coil of anxiety. He followed her through the corridors, noting how the palace seemed to pulse with energy, each crystal surface resonating faintly underfoot. The halls were alive with soft hums, almost as if the building itself was aware of the significance of his presence. The assembly chamber was immense, a vast amphitheater with floating platforms that extended over an endless expanse. Leaders from distant regions of Zytheris had gathered, their wings folded and eyes glinting with curiosity. Sarilith led Elias to a designated platform near the front, positioning him where he could observe without intruding. "Observe carefully," she whispered, her wings brushing lightly against the ambient energy. "Every gesture, every tone, every pause carries intent and meaning. Even minor errors can ripple outward. Presence here is not passive. It is engagement, responsibility, and diplomacy all in one." The session began with introductions, each leader performing subtle displays of respect, their wings tracing delicate patterns, their voices resonating in harmonic sequences that conveyed hierarchy and subtle intention. Elias focused intently, cataloging the layers of communication, the unspoken cues that informed each interaction. Sarilith's voice interrupted his thoughts. "You will also participate," she said, eyes glinting. "Respond when addressed. Speak when required. Do not assume your presence is ceremonial, it is active, and every response will be measured for sincerity and understanding." Elias swallowed, nerves tightening. The first leader addressed him directly, a question delivered in a tone both inquisitive and commanding. "Human ambassador, how does your species approach alliance and trust?" He paused, recalling every lesson from the past week, the observations of ceremony, the study of gesture and intent, and Sarilith's guidance on presence. "With respect, transparency, and the willingness to adapt," he replied, voice steady. "We understand that trust is earned through action and consistency, and that alliances require both attention and responsibility." A ripple of wings moved through the chamber, a subtle acknowledgement of his answer. Elias exhaled silently, heart still racing but his posture firm. He continued to respond to subsequent inquiries, careful to align gestures, tone, and eye contact with the customs he had learned. Each interaction was a test, each response a measure of his commitment to the pledge. Hours passed as discussions unfolded. Leaders debated, presented proposals, and examined one another's positions. Elias remained vigilant, noting every shift of wings, every nuanced expression, every pause in cadence. His focus never wavered, yet he began to detect a subtle rhythm within the proceedings, a pattern of interaction, a language of motion and resonance he could now interpret with increasing clarity. Sarilith observed him from a short distance, wings occasionally flickering in approval. "You are adapting, human," she said quietly. "Your understanding is deepening, but remember, the pledge demands more than correctness. It requires presence of mind, the courage to act ethically, and the ability to navigate complexities without faltering under pressure." A minor conflict arose among the leaders, a disagreement over territorial boundaries. Sarilith inclined her head slightly, signaling that Elias should offer insight. His pulse quickened. He formulated a response, carefully considering both the literal and symbolic implications of his words. "Respect for established boundaries and mutual recognition of intent are essential," he said. "Diplomacy must honor tradition while fostering cooperation. A resolution that balances both will serve all parties best." The chamber fell silent for a moment, then wings rippled in acknowledgement. Seralith's eyes glimmered faintly, a subtle approval that bolstered Elia's confidence. The pledge was no longer just obligation. It was engagement, a living bond that demanded his intellect, attention, and integrity. As the session concluded, Seralith led him away, the hum of the palace corridors soothing after the intensity of the assembly. "You have done well today," she said. "Yet remember, human, the pledge is ongoing. Every day brings new challenges, and each requires your attention, adaptability, and commitment. You are no longer merely a visitor. You are a participant, a representative, and a student of our ways." Elias nodded, exhaustion mingling with a growing sense of purpose. The accidental gesture that had begun this journey now felt like a deliberate path, one that demanded courage, awareness, and integrity. The sun filtered through the crystalline spires as they reached his quarters. He paused, glancing at Seralith. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for guidance and for patience." Her wings shifted lightly, a hint of a smile in her expression. "The journey is mutual, human," she replied softly. "Through this pledge, we learn of each other and perhaps more than either of us expected. Rest now, for tomorrow will demand presence, awareness, and insight in ways you have yet to imagine." Elias exhaled, feeling the weight and promise of the pledge settle around him. It was no longer an accident. It was responsibility, connection, and a bond that would shape both his mission and his understanding of Sci-Fi, and perhaps the beginnings of something far more personal. The final day of the formal observation cycle dawned with a soft, golden glow spilling through the crystalline spires of the palace. Elias moved deliberately through the corridors, muscles taut from days of intensive learning, observation, and engagement. Yet beneath the fatigue lay a quiet confidence. The pledge, once an accidental entanglement, had become a guiding structure, shaping his actions, his thoughts, and the way he navigated the intricate web of Zirathi custom. Seralith met him in the central atrium, her wings partially extended, catching the light in a cascade of shifting hues. "Today," she said, her voice carrying a rare note of warmth beneath authority, "you will participate fully in the rite of accord. It is the culmination of your lessons, the test of both understanding and intent. Your presence will be noted not only by the court, but by every leader in attendance." Elias nodded, swallowing the familiar knot of anxiety. The rite of accord was more than ceremony. It was the public acknowledgement of alliances, respect, and fidelity. Missteps could ripple across political and cultural lines, yet he felt steadier than before. He had learned, adapted, and observed. He was prepared. The hall was immense, filled with leaders, council members, and attendants. Suspended platforms hovered in precise geometrical patterns, reflecting light that danced across walls like living prisms. The Zirathi performers and warriors assumed their positions, wings extended in intricate displays of hierarchy and readiness. Elias felt the resonance of the room, an energy that vibrated beneath him, through him, and around him. Seralith's presence was a calm center, her wings folding slightly as she guided him forward. "Step carefully, human. This is no mere ritual, it is living protocol. Engage with presence, respect, and attention. Let intent guide action." He followed her onto the main platform, his posture deliberate, movements measured. Leaders acknowledged him with subtle inclinations of wings and shifts in gaze. Every gesture, every tone, carried significance. Elias responded in kind, aligning his actions with the subtle codes he had learned over the previous days. The rite began with harmonic resonance from crystal instruments, vibrations coursing through the hall. The Zirathi performed coordinated sequences, gestures, postures, and movements that intertwined symbolism, authority, and ritual. Elias mirrored where appropriate, inserting himself seamlessly into the flow, careful to observe and respond without overstepping. A moment came when Seralith signaled him directly, a test of engagement. A subtle gesture of her wing indicated he should present his understanding of the pledge publicly. Elias inhaled deeply, stepping forward with measured grace. "I honor the pledge made," he said clearly, voice steady.